Herculean battles and merger perils are today's top picks from Reuters Breakingviews. As Italy's bond yield battle looks to be over, Rome wages war against a second spread. And a warning about the perils of dual listing for BAE and EADS. Pierre Brinson, nice to have you in the studio.
Nice to be here.
And I know we're going to talk about Thomson Reuters as well. We've got to be careful, but let's start with what's been called low spread, and that's the difference between Italian and German yields. As well as dealing with that, they're having to deal with a productivity.
It comes from Mario Monti. Mario Monti talked about the second spread, or as has become an Italian word now, lo spread. And that gap is the productivity gap, and that's the one he has to address, because structural reforms are coming to the fore now that Italy's yields are more or less getting back to their pre-crisis level, thanks to, of course, to the ECB's Draghi plan. So they're hovering around 5.2, 5.3%. Now Italy has to really get to the bottom of things. The main problem is heavy debt load, growth. No more deficit, really. They have a structural deficit now, primary surplus of their budget. And so the question is, how do you really put the economy back into shape? And they have to address it. Labor costs, unit labor costs have risen much more than the Eurozone average over the last 12 years.
And that's a structural Italian problem that's been there for
that's
decades,
a structural,
right?
Meaning political. It's deeply ingrained. It has to. Monti wants to go at it with talking with the unions, get a national deal in order to allow businesses to strike their own labor contracts on the ground.
But change is going to be a long time coming, let's face it.
And it's going to be difficult, and he's going to face political difficulties, especially, of course, running up to the elections.
But I find it interesting, and just a final point on this piece, I find it interesting that Neil Unmack highlights this issue as yields come down on the bonds. There's this fear that Italy becomes complacent and doesn't deal with this
Absolutely. Neil's point
is
that without pressure, there might be, without the pressure of financial markets, there might be a temptation on the part of the Italian government, the Italian unions, to, oh, this is a thing of the past. Let's go back to, business, so to speak, as usual. Yeah. And that's the big danger, let's face it.
All right. BAE EADS, yes, a godsend for deal-starved hedge funds, as Quentin Webb says. But this idea of a DLC, a dual-listed company, hidden dangers.
Well, as Quentin headlined his piece, run DLC. That's the basic of the heart of the matter is that this is not an ideal situation for ARBs, and the reason being that both companies are going to keep dual listing. These are not interchangeable shares. In an ideal world, they would need to do that in an ideal, in a free capital markets world. But you have political consideration, national pride involved. You have tax reasons. Companies would face tax bills if one company bought the other, and then the flowback thing, meaning a lot of funds would have, whether the company is listed in London or in Paris, you have the flowback with shares coming
now.
Back.
What can we learn from Thomson Reuters? And maybe we have to be careful here, but Thomson Reuters, perhaps an example of how DLCs don't work as effectively as they should, right?
As anticipated. Theoretically, shares would move in sync, right? The shares of both companies, same management structure, same board, same operating, same assets. They should work in sync. In the case of Thomson Reuters, but that might be an exception, as Quentin points out, because it was right in the heart of the heart of the financial crisis, and so you could. And what happened is that shares of Reuters underperformed shares of the Canadian listed company at the time. So even speculation that this is a fixed situation, done deal, everyone not much to expect from it, that could be overturned. And so hedge funds and ARBs have to be very careful about such a situation, which they don't like in principle.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Pierre, many thanks for that. You can find both those pieces, of course, on the Reuters Breakingviews website. For more insight, watch our US Breakingviews show. That's on every day, 12:30 Eastern, 17:30 BST. I'm Axel Threlfall. This is Reuters.